We had gone through Hezekiah's tunnel and had exited Hezekiah's tunnel, and we're at the Pool of Siloam. It is amazing. We have Google searched, YouTube, and things on what's going on over there now, because they had just found this because of a break in a pipe, and they uncovered part of this. It is amazing how much they've gotten done since we were over there in April. So much more uncovered. It's a very large place, and we're going to go from there over across the Kidron Valley. Okay, Marcia, will you bump the air conditioner down? From this view, this is across the Mount of Olives, looking over at Jerusalem, and you can see, of course, the Dome of the Rock, and that's where the Temple Mount was, where the Holy of Holies was, and then you can also see this wall around. And if you'll notice the different colored stones here, and you can see it some back up this way. That's when they started digging. That was from the original wall. Okay, and we want to kind of make reference here, because we're going to take a walk around through the Mount of Olives, the Garden of Gethsemane, and mention 2 or 3 churches that are up here, and then we're going to go back around to the south wall right here. And this was the entrance where the first gospel message was preached. This was the main entrance to go into the temple. The Pool of Siloam and City of David. Down here they would cleanse and go up, and then of course we've got a picture of one of the mikvahs right at the base of those steps. And we know that there were many places for them to cleanse themselves before they got here. But saying that, so you'll know when we come around and see, about 1/3 of this wall actually still has the original steps, and they were cut into the bedrock. They were not stones that were placed. The rest of it is deteriorated. There were 3 entrances on this one wall here, and we'll name those when we get to them. As we came out of this location, going in, we had an opportunity to ride a camel. Okay, now we only had one taker. This lady was from Louisiana, and she was actually there. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mark. She was there with her brother and her sister-in-law. They had traveled together. So we stuck a picture of that in there so you could see, because I know we didn't get very good pictures at all of the wild camels that we could see out in the, of course, in the wild. But there were plenty of camels around. When you look between the Mount of Olives over here, these are all tombs. Do you remember why there's so many tombs on this side of the city? If you'll look here, when you go look back this way, it's solid all the way to the Mount of Corruption. Tombs just lined on both sides of the valley there. And this valley here, looking from this angle and actually looking from Jerusalem back towards the Mount of Olives, it just looks like a little swag. It's a major valley. It is a hike. And I mention that because this is where Jesus would leave the city and come across to Gethsemane to pray. This is where he was arrested. We'll get to that location here in just a moment. But it's important to realize what the topography is and what these people. These are a very expensive place to be buried, from what I can understand. Do you remember why people are wanting to be buried here so much? The Jews are wanting to be buried here. Number one, they want to be facing the temple, or the Temple Mount. And in their belief, this is where Christ is going to appear to everyone, but they are going to be first to see that. So they are there to be in the front of the line. So here we're looking south. I guess it'd be south-southwest here. Pardon me. Here we're looking south, and then we get on into the garden, and in the background you can see. This is looking northeast. You can see the top of a church building there, and that church building is called Dominus Flevit. Okay. Does anybody have any? That's Latin. Does anybody have any idea what that means? It's found in the Bible. That's hint number one. I would think that. Let me give you another clue, David. It's the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. Now, I would be like you when you start looking at Dominus. I would be thinking top of the hill, and it is in a high place. When you see elevations where, for instance, Jerusalem's built, it is a fortified elevation. This is a high elevation over here in the garden. Share something personal with you. This is one of those places. Now, we've got several pictures in the book of the Mount of Olives. But this was a special place. And I told you that we went to several places over there that they were different. Had a different feel. They were very spiritual. They were very emotional. Silence was deafening. Have you ever heard that before? Silence was deafening. I can't describe how peaceful it was on the Mount of Olives. You could hear the birds. You could hear nature sounds. But anything other than a nature sound, for example, a train passing by, a loud car passing by, a backfire, a horn honking, it was disturbing. Now, this was a special place. And I seek every Sunday morning when we gather around this table, I try to find that place. And it's hard. It's difficult. But I can still remember we had a Devo here, and then we were turned loose to just go find in this quiet place, to find our quiet place and pray. Very special experience, and I can tell you, as long as I live, I'm going to do my best to find that spot. It would be, I know when we had our worship service, both at Nazareth was special, but when we had it right there at the hidden gate where Christ was brought out, when he was being tried. It's just one of those areas that nothing else exists. It's just that moment. Very special. We go up through the garden towards this church, and we did not put any pictures of it in here. This is called the Church of All Nations, and this is right there at Gethsemane, the location of Gethsemane. Again, this is another one of the churches that we had an opportunity to sing in, and the acoustics after each note, I don't know how long it takes for that echo to stop, but it is there for a while, and it just really was impressive to hear these songs that we sing in a building like this. This is a location just outside here. At this location is where Jesus was arrested. We look at some of the pictures. This is a mural inside of this church building, Church of All Nations, of Jesus being arrested. You might say, well, why is it called the Church of All Nations? I don't have the date. Marcia, you might remember the date when all of the nations were put together. I believe it was. I did have it here. I just forgot it. 1924, there were many nations that contributed to this. Everyone, there's churches everywhere, but every country that came over to Israel and bought property, they built a church. Germany has churches over there. Russia has churches over there. It's amazing, and then the artwork and the amount of trim that they have in there. But as you see, we'll look here in a little bit, and you see all of these nations are represented in the ceiling of this cathedral. Pardon me for this slide, but this is a part of the floor that's many hundred years old. Now, this is not back during the time of Christ, because this building wasn't here, as far as I know, as far as I recollect. But this is a very old, hundreds of year old part of the floor. And then when they rebuilt this building, earthquake had destroyed several of the buildings over there in the, I think in the 18th century. But they came back and tried to match that original floor, and it's really a beautiful piece of art. This is the seal of the U.S., United States, that's in the ceiling there. Of course, it's in an olive tree. I really appreciate where they, in a lot of these buildings that may not be that old, for instance, like this building, but they left part of the bedrock, part of the foundation that was there when Christ was there. This is just outside. They've got some olive trees that are fenced off. If I'm not mistaken, the placard on this tree said it was just shy of 1,000 years old, this olive tree. And it supposedly came from trees that were growing in this area during the time of Christ. So it's very interesting to see how some of these trees can live as long as they live. We exit over there, and I know I'm leaving something, maybe leaving something out. It was no, it's on the other side. We cross back over into Jerusalem, and we are going into the Lion Gate. And back during the first century, it was called the Sheep Gate. I don't know exactly when it changed, but it changed from the Sheep Gate to the Lion's Gate. And this was the route that Jesus would have taken coming back into Jerusalem after his arrest. We've got some pictures here, and I know you saw these, most of these, when we had the presentation early when we first got back. But this is the pool of Bethesda. Pool of Bethesda. And I want you to look at John chapter 5. John chapter 5, and it's talking about the healing at the pool on the Sabbath. I'm going to read verses 2 through 9. And now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, an Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool and when the water is stirred up, and when I am going, another steps down before me." What did Jesus tell him in verse 8? He says, "Get up and take your bed and walk." At this point, he didn't need that water. All he needed was faith. Also, let's look at John chapter 9. John chapter 9 and verses 1 through 11. It's talking about the blind man being healed. A man that was blind from birth. A man that had never seen before. When we look at these two, I'll just start in verse 1 and we'll read part of this. It says, "As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciple asked him, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?' And Jesus answered, 'It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world.' And having said these things, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said to him, 'Go wash in the pool of Siloam,'" which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. When you start looking at the miracles that Christ did, these are the only 2 miracles that we could find that happened in Jerusalem. Okay, now we know that there were miracles done around there. There were a lot of miracles done up in Galilee and around the sea. But in Jerusalem, these are the only 2 that we could find. And I want you to think back. Go to 2 Samuel 5:6. 2 Samuel 5:6. Second Samuel chapter 5, verse 6. Do you remember when we had David coming up to Jerusalem and the Jebusites were there? Do you remember what the Jebusites told David? In chapter 5 and verse 6 of 2 Samuel, it says, "And the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites." It's talking about David. "The inhabitants of the land, who said to David, 'You will not come in here, but the blind and the lame will ward you off.'" Thinking David cannot come in here. Now, David was told the blind and the lame could keep him from conquering Jerusalem. Of course, we know what happened. We know that he was successful. And it's just ironic that the 2 miracles that Jesus did in Jerusalem, one of them Siloam and one of them at Bethsaida was healing a blind man and a lame man. So I just thought that was very interesting. Got a few more pictures here. You can see the alcoves. See the archways there. And all of this is from excavation of Bethsaida.
And the pool is actually in that dark doorway.
Yes. Also, right there at Bethsaida, there's another church I've got some notes on, and that's St. Anne Church. It's just north of the Pool of Bethsaida, and this is supposedly where Mary was born. This is one place that says Mary was born here. We also talked about the 5 roof colonnades back at the Pool of Bethsaida, and then again we'll look back at the porticos, the archways, a lot of elaborate diggings. And when we get into Kent, just like you was asking about Golgotha last Wednesday night, when we get into those areas were areas where they were harvesting stone. Both places that claimed to be where Christ was crucified was in a yard where they were harvesting stones for all of the building that was going on in Jerusalem. So you can see that both places are very similar, and most maps and things you look at, they will give you both of them because they both fit the criteria of being that place. There were several young men taking bread to vendors. This is just one picture that we took. They push those little 2-wheel carts around, loaded down, and they're going around to different vendors there in the old town. Going through Herod's Gate. And this will be where we'll see the Via Dolorosa, and it's going to be the Way of the Cross. And we'll show you how these areas are marked. You can actually see the pathway that Christ took. I'll read this for you in case you can't see this far. This says the Way of the Cross is a religious path following the sites of Jesus' Passion. It begins at the Praetorium, where Jesus was condemned and whipped according to tradition in the premises of the Antonia Tower, and reaches the site of Calvary. And that's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That's one of the locations where Jesus was crucified and buried. The present route was crystallized during the 16th century, subsequently only slightly modified. The route includes 14 stations. Every Friday, the Franciscans lead a procession along the route, beginning from the yard to the building across the way at 1500. And everybody's invited to take part of that. But you can see here what they have. They mark biblically everything that happened to Christ on that walk all the way to where he was hung on the cross. Number 1 says Jesus is condemned to death. Number 2, and of course we're starting right down here at the bottoms. Number 1. Number 2, Jesus carries the cross. 3 is Jesus falls for the first time. Number 4, Jesus meets his mother, Mary. Number 5, Simon of Cyrene offers to help carry the cross. Number 6, Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. Number 7, Jesus falls for the second time. Number 8 in the location, and we're up here now, Jesus meets the woman of Jerusalem. 9, Jesus falls for the third time. Jesus is stripped of his garments, is number 10. Number 11, Jesus is nailed to the cross. 12, Jesus dies on the cross. Then Jesus is taken down from the cross and Jesus is buried. And we'll show each, as you're going through the old part of town here, they have these up on the wall commemorating the place where each one of these historically or traditionally happened on this path. You probably noticed it said with slight modifications. It was probably from building that happened after the crucifixion. You can see this is station number 5, and of course you'll see the archway here, and it's where Simon of Cyrene came out to help him. This is on the outside. We're fixing to go into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I can't remember what century it was, but it was during the time when Israel was having a lot of problems, but they closed this one entrance up here where there's only one going in right now. And I know we were there probably in a pretty busy time, with been in springtime, but it was pretty crowded. And I would think every picture and every video I've seen before and since we were over there, I've never seen that thing very empty. There's always lines. Oh, I forgot, yeah. For generations, now, of course, this is commemorating the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. The keeper of the door that locks and unlocks that door for people to get Christians to get in, people from all over the world come to see this, is a Muslim family. Now, how that started, we don't know. We were told that, and then we've read and looked at it several times since, and it's several generations of a Muslim family that's the keeper of the door here at the Holy Sepulchre, which is very interesting to me. This is a building inside of the Holy Sepulchre that's actually covering what was left of the tomb where Jesus was buried. Now, all of this was a rock quarry in the first century, and this was a garden area on the edge back here where this is the very back of this building. You come in from this side over here, but the back of it is the standing portion that's left of the tomb where they traditionally say that Christ was buried. We went in behind this area. If you look right back over this way, we went in behind there into a cave-like area. This was somebody's special sitting place. Don't know any history on it or anything, but you can tell someone of authority had used it. Again, a tomb in the back of this cave. That you can still see the rock quarry. And then here we are going through the dung gate. Okay? I know what I thought of when I thought of the dung gate, but for whatever reason, through the years, this is where everybody hauled their trash. This was the gate that all of the trash went out. As we were over in the Mount of Olives, back over here, we could see this is the southern wall, and there were three entrances right here on this southern wall. The one that would be on our far left was a Huldah gate, and then there was a triple gate that was right out here in the center, and then there was a single gate on the far end over there. Notice the steps here. I thought it was very, very interesting. These steps were carved, and notice none of them are. We're accustomed to step, 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 and not having to look or pay any attention on the height. Once we see how high a step is, or we see how far it is, we just take off walking.
That just carved out of stone that's right there.
Bedrock, yeah. I think some of it, David, you can see where some of these are missing. Some of them probably are not, but you can see areas that are down here, especially some of the lower ones. But they carve these things at different heights and different depths, so you have to look down. This was the entrance to the holy place. Okay? They've had many opportunities to cleanse themselves before they got to this point. And then they wanted them to go in with the proper attitude, and that was with their head down, moving slowly. Holy, reverent. They wanted them to come in there with the proper attitude. This gives you a larger view. Again, if you look closely, you can see what's original, and you can see what's been added at the top. This is one of the best preserved mikvahs that we saw. And if you remember back when we introduced this and started talking about how many mikvahs there were at the base of those steps, there were opportunities between the pool at Bethsaida, the pool of Siloam, and then there were, if I'm not mistaken, there were somewhere in the range of 50 mikvahs that have been located right around in this area that has been excavated. So there were a lot of opportunities. Well, there was the first gospel message was preached. Huh? The day of Pentecost. When we look, we know this is one of those areas we know that Christ moved up those steps at some point in time. Peter, we know Peter was there. We know that the apostles were there. So, another one of those places that are very special. Now, I will say this: at the time of the day that we were there, it was hot and wasn't near as pleasant as the Mount of Olives was when we were over there. But it's a place that's very special. The last thing we're going to look at tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to Darwin. Did I give everyone a song number? 111. 111. We had an opportunity to go through the Holocaust History Museum, and we mentioned this early before in the early presentation on this, an overview, and the room that they had fixed up to that was there to commemorate the death of the children during this Holocaust. Now, 1.5 million Jewish children were exterminated during this Holocaust. And they had, this room, it was very dark, and it wasn't very good for vertigo, I can tell you that. They had set up mirrors when you walk through this room, and they had 5 candles lit. And they were lit and placed in such a way that they reflected light to represent 1.5 million. There's supposed to be a candle light representing the life of each one of these children. Very somber, quiet place. The only thing you could hear was the narrator reading the name, was it the name and the age
And the place where they killed.
of all of these children. Very slowly, methodically, very clearly, and they said it takes about 3 months to go through everybody's name, and then they'll start all over again. Outside, there are trees planted all the way around. There's a big, beautiful park there, and trees are planted there in memory and to commemorate non-Jews that helped during the Holocaust. And this happens to be Schindler's tree for he and his wife there. So we took a picture of that. Again, a place all through the park. There were silhouettes and benches. People had donated, remembering different ones, and a very emotional trip through here. And pictures, rooms upon rooms, and hundreds, thousands of pictures from the Holocaust time of what those people endured. So we'll stop there and we'll get back